So next up, we have Ella Donald and Shelly Mills talking about how to run a successful cybersecurity tabletop program. Now, Ella Donald is at the University of Queensland. She's the Change and Communication Manager within Cybersecurity at UQ, a group of 8 university. Ella combined her diverse background in journalism, tertiary education, media, and learning design by breaking into data governance and cybersecurity. She's worked across a variety of projects in both spaces, helping to deliver new technologies, run a data literacy program, and uplift incident response. She's also developed a self-paced change management course for all UQ staff and convenes the monthly change management community of practice. Shelly Mills, formerly of UQ, and now of Sunchaser Cyber, as my rapid updates to the bio here, is the other half to this gang of 2 today. So Shelly Mills was the Cyber Security Improvements Manager at UQ. She has been working in cybersecurity and data governance for the last 5 years and brings additional experience in comms and as a board director. At UQ, she oversaw the Cybersecurity Improvements Program, oversaw operational cybersecurity comms, managed the Cybersecurity Intern Program, developed and delivered regular tabletop exercises, and managed a diverse team. Shelly brings a non-traditional background with university qualifications in ecology and PR, demonstrating the alternate pathways and options for a career change that can be taken to enter the field of cybersecurity, which is hugely important. To get that skills uplift, we need to get people from all different backgrounds and challenge the stale, male and pale conventional thinking that I represent. Now, as mentioned before, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the previous one, we're taking questions through the app, so please go through the app. I can then moderate and you guys can all upvote, and we can get a Q&A session at the end. So if you could welcome Shelly and Ella to the stage, and I'll get out of the way.
All right. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name's Ella Donald and
I'm Shelly Mills.
And tabletops are the word. They provide a training ground for how to respond to the numerous threats that this fast-moving industry brings, a chance for team bonds to strengthen, and an outreach opportunity to other business units. While we can't promise to give you all the answers that may be posed to you in your daily work, we wanted to share some of the tips that we think are really the most important in terms of putting together a successful tabletop. Because while we've run a bunch of them now over the last, I want to say 18 months or so, we're once at square one. You know, we've never run an exercise of this nature before. But first, just a little bit more about us. I know you've just heard a bit, but we'll talk about ourselves a tiny bit more. So I like to say that I would have never imagined getting into IT or cybersecurity until I did. But once I did, it really did feel inevitable. As a kid, I loved playing around on various hand-me-down laptops that were supplied by my grandpa, with a particular memory of a mid-90s Toshiba that is still stuck within my brain. I quickly became my family and their friends' technical support. However, I first went into journalism, as you just heard about before, wrote about topics like film and TV and sport for a bunch of publications, both locally and internationally. And I also taught undergraduate courses at UQ in addition to this. And I will say you are definitely one of the, more easier crowds I've been to than lecturing a bunch of 18-year-olds, if I do say so myself. I then moved into data governance and then cybersecurity, as you heard just before, and working as a change and communications manager in those areas. In my role today and in those in the past, I think there's a real clear thread of a passion to teach, to always learn, and to develop and decipher, those hard to understand topics and develop those connections. It's really easy to see how tabletops fits into this, I think. And over to Shelly.
Thanks, Ella. I'm Shelly. Similarly, I do not come from a cyber background at all. I have a lot of degrees and debt in ecology, dead water bugs, public relations, and then I discovered my passion for cyber working as a communications officer on a cybersecurity awareness campaign, and I was obsessed. So I've been in cybersecurity and data governance for the past 5 or so years at the University of Queensland up until recently when I left and started my own company. And I was really privileged to get to work with Ella for most of my time at the University of Queensland. The two of us are similar, unashamed geeks. We're just sponges to learn and do anything new that we can. So it has been a privilege being able to put together the tabletops program at UQ with Ella, and she is now leading that.
Thank you very much, Shelly. All right, so I guess we need to give a bit of an introduction into what is a tabletop for maybe the uninitiated in the room. So when my grandma, who doesn't work in cybersecurity, asked me about tabletops, you know, when you're at a family dinner and someone goes, but what do you do exactly? I describe to them like a sports drill. They're a way to practice the necessary skills before game day, so to speak, in a supportive setting. We hope that maybe game day doesn't come, but unfortunately, you know, we do have to prepare for that inevitability. So a tabletop involves writing a realistic scenario that is based on incidents that maybe have occurred at other organisations, or maybe you've got a new technology or policy or something like that, and you want to test it. So the scenario is written with around 5 to 6 injects. I like to liken those to like plot twists in a movie, you know, developments that happen throughout the story. And what these injects do is that they develop the scenario further, and they move it through the different possibilities, and they involve all of the stakeholders relevant to that potential incident. All right, hand over to Shelly after that quick intro.
Thank you. So I'm going to take some time to just run through how we set up our tabletop program at UQ, the basics, and then Ella's going to jump into our top tips to help really make it succeed. So just starting with some context, at UQ we run 2 different types of tabletops. So executive or business, the audience there is really those senior executives with an aim to raise awareness that cybersecurity is a threat to UQ, like this could go wrong and what would happen, and get them thinking, so get that engagement as well. The facilitation, we actually engage with the ASDs, ACSC, they've got a booth out there too, and they've been absolutely great. We do all the prep work, the background, we work with them on the scenario, and then they then deliver, and we find they've got a bit more status than us standing up there to all the executives.
Absolutely.
And we run them once a year just to keep that awareness. We'll also usually do a threat briefing from the ASD a week or a day before just to get it all front of mind. Then we run technical tabletops, which I think would almost be our favourite because they're so much fun.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the audience for that is our Cybersecurity Operations Centre and any other relevant IT stuff. For example, we did one on Drupal Get On, issues with the web CMS, so we obviously had our web developers, or we did one with AWS Bucket, so obviously we've got the infrastructure team who are responsible for that. The purpose of these is more so to test out IR plans, build confidence in those IR processes, and also build those engagements with the other teams so they know how they would engage in the instance of a breach or an incident. We facilitate those ourselves, and we do that about every quarter. Yeah. So in terms of developing and executing a tabletop, there are 3 key groups of stakeholders. A little pointer here. So first group, planning team, that would be Ella and myself, plus any other relevant stakeholders. So for example, for our technical tabletops, we would have the cybersecurity operations manager, and we would work with him to go, what are your aims? What's the objective that you want to get out of this? And then we would come up with the scenario and the injects from there. For the executive ones, we'll work with the CIO and the CISO to determine the aims and objectives. Then, obviously, the participants. So for executives, we would usually have our CIO, our CISO, any technical seniors such as the head of infrastructure, our CSOC manager, and also senior executives as well, such as the VC and her direct reports. For the technical ones, it would be, as we discussed, our CSOC members, plus anyone else on the periphery who might be involved in the scenario. And then finally, which is also really fun, is the observers, because this is an opportunity to bring stakeholders in who might be interested, but you don't want to make the tabletop too big. You don't want 30 people, you only want the relevant people. So, for example, we had an intern program, as mentioned, and we've got a lot of our wonderful interns here, and they stayed on. So it was a great opportunity in a recent tabletop to have our interns as observers. So they'll sit there, they'll take notes, which help us develop the after-action report, but they also get to engage. We've also had AUSCERT, we've had academic, the UQ academic side, we had risk and compliance external to IT, so it's a great opportunity to bring more people in as well. So the 3 key groups. What's our formula now we've got that to develop and deliver? So step 1, the most important, this is where most of the time is, it's preparing. So as we mentioned before, we need to know what's the aim and objectives for the tabletop. What do we want to test? What scenario? Once we know that, we need to determine the scenario. And we like to let our imagination run wild, especially so with the technical ones. Like, an aim was to send our cybersecurity operations manager off to a desert island.
Absolutely.
We did achieve that.
Yep.
Took a while for him to be comfortable, but
He's going on a large number of vacations in our exercises. He recently went to Antarctica as well.
and we like to personalise until we had an analyst, and he loves his cat. So like, okay, he's going to be on call, but his cat's been really sick. He's been at the vet all night. He's not answering his phone. So we'll make that fun. Based on the index and the scenario, you'll work out what participants you need there. And it's a lot of planning, so we'll have supporting documentation to help plan. And I created some templates of what we create. So I just put them on my website here. They're all free. Scroll to the very bottom, and you can download them. We create a facilitator run sheet, which I'll show you on the next slide. And I think that's really helpful, and maybe take a photo, because that's what we work from, and it keeps us on time. We'll distribute a participant guide ahead of time, so they can all see what's the aim of this, what are we doing. Most importantly as well are the PowerPoint slides for the actual tabletop. I have an intro and then the index on the slides, and we also distribute observer templates for the people who come along and observe. Right. So here's an example of one of our run sheets. So you can see up here we've got the real time. So it would be for Ella and I, we're running it, we give an intro, we give each inject, and it's to keep us accountable. So we know it's 9:40, we should be at inject number 1 by now. Then you can see what the inject is. This is it's a real one we use. We decided to have a Drupal get on 2.0 because there was a Drupal get on 1.0, and just make everything explode. Then we've got facilitator questions. So if we put that inject up and people start talking, great. But if they're not talking, we've got some questions for ourselves to prompt them to keep the conversation going. And then especially if we're doing a technical tabletop, technical people can get real bogged down in the minutiae. And even though Ella will talk to that and you want to try and bring them out of that, you want to have some information for yourself. That's info which may not be shared with the other players in case they start getting down in that detail and be like, oh, no, this hasn't happened, or this is why. So if they ask these tricky questions, you know. And then you might even want to know, what do you think the players are going to do? So this is what's worked from us. You could adapt it or take it. But I think it's been really helpful to have all that filled in. It makes you feel prepared when you're going in to run the tabletop. All right, so now you've prepared everything. Next step is to execute. For us, we always want to try and hold it in person. You just don't get the engagement on Zoom. You're going to have someone working in the other screen. They're analysts, they're always busy. Like, they'll be in the other screen. So we always try and hold it in person, as much as our technical teams hate being in the office.
And as much as it's hard to coordinate those schedules as well.
Yeah, so you have to book quite a way in advance, put it in the calendars, have that participant document in the attachment to the invite so they know what's happening. We usually have them for about 2 hours so it doesn't get too tedious, and we really like to make them memorable. So for example, our business tabletops, the first one, we're like, well, we need to get everyone engaged, we want them to remember it, so I'll book a really nice room, and we had it catered, and we decided to call it Exercise a Lectura, because University of Queensland, it's a university, so the scientific name for brush turkey is a Lectura. We are constantly under siege at UQ by brush turkeys, similar to how we are constantly under siege by our cyber adversaries. So we had scrub turkey theme, scrub turkey stress balls, recent one.
We do commit to a theme,
we
absolutely.
Commit.
Yes, definitely.
Project Swedenarja, so that's the scientific name for snake because it was an insider threat. Absolutely. Giant pythons, like rubber snakes. I actually had our provost come up to us a few weeks after one, the scrub turkey one. He started chatting to me about, he's got a chicken in his backyard, he thinks he's a brush turkey, like they remembered it. So it's a great way to make them enjoy it and get rid of some of that pressure.
Absolutely.
And then make sure you've got your PowerPoint ready to support your injects when you go. So you're all good. On the day then, we'd usually go through on our PowerPoint, we'll do a welcome and housekeeping. It's going to go for 2 hours. This is what you can expect. This is our aim. This is what we're doing and why. And we'll always highlight the aim is not to pass with flying colours, because can you imagine going in, you're going to feel a lot of pressure, like, I need to go and there's going to be some random scenario and I need to get this right. So I think for the people participating, there can be a lot of pressure. So you need to make them feel comfortable. We always remind them the aim isn't to pass. Fail, be honest, be candid. We want to get improvement opportunities. We're going to create a report at the end, and this report can help you get funding moving forward for the things which don't work. I mean, we've had people we'll ask one of our questions, like, well, what would happen when this happens? And they'd be like, no one's going to notice for 2 days, like, nothing. really. And we'll just all have a laugh like, yeah, we're stuffed. But at least you feel comfortable to be honest, and we found that rapport has been really important. And once we've done all that, we've said, what are we doing? What are the objectives? We jump into the fun part of the meet, which is going through the injects, going through that facilitator run sheet, which we've just been through. Then finally, so we have run the whole tabletop, we've got to the end. What do we do next? Well, all the analysts and everyone who participate gets to sigh because it's over, all their stress is over, they can go have a beer or something. And then Ella and I and any of our observers, any of the planning team, will go have a post-exercise debrief. It's nice to do it over a coffee or something and just chat immediately after. What are our key learnings? What did we think about that? We also like to maybe the next day or the next week have a discussion with the participants. Ella's really great. She'll have a PowerPoint slide with some questions pre-prepared to just guide that discussion around what went well, what could we do better, and what can we change next time. And both these things help go into our after action report along with the observer notes. So we've given them the template to fill out, we collect all those, we bring all of those together, and we create an after action report where we go through at each inject what were the risks, what are the improvement opportunities, what are the key lessons learned, and I put a template of that up. If we go back here on my website, we've got a template of what the after action report looks like. Get the photo there. All right, so now we've gone through, we've executed the whole tabletop, which was a really quick rundown and probably pretty scary. Ella's going to jump into our top tips for doing it well.
All right, so with that we have our top tabletop tips to give you today, and we really wanted to focus on the main ones that I guess have been really beneficial, those key observations we think have really helped make our program so successful and have really, gotten some really awesome outcomes in terms of the last 18 months of what we've done. Okay. So our first tip is having SMART aims and objectives. So what that means is that the aims and objectives need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So what this means is that the participants, the facilitator, and anyone who reads the after action report can be really clear on what is being asked of them. So the aims and objectives are written at the start of the development process once the topic of the exercise has been decided on. And our name should state what the broad purpose of the exercise is, along with the clear subject and context. We've got an example of one on the screen right now. So objectives should outline the clear goals to be completed within the exercise, which serve the aim, along with how it will be measured and how the context that will be used during the exercise. So there should be 3 or 4 objectives for each exercise as a bit of a loose rule. You don't have to stick to it hard and fast, but definitely, the more objectives you have, the harder it will be to adequately achieve all of them, in your opinion, in the limited time that you've got. So once those aims and objectives have been defined and approved by your subject matter experts, they can be used to craft the scenario that you want to play out during the tabletop. That includes the injects that will comprise the exercise that we talked about previously. So we share the aims and objectives in a participant information document that's sent out about 2 weeks before the exercise. That allows for some familiarity, so the participants will receive that about 2 weeks before. And just to note, we don't put the injects on that document because the injects are a surprise for the day. Okay, that brings us to our second tip. So our second tip is having a really clear scope. So Shelly touched a bit on this just before. So when I design tabletop exercises, I have a similar inclination to Shelly. I like to imagine really creative, elaborate, James Bond-like scenarios of espionage, lots of twists and turns, and you're convinced it'll thrill the audience. However, I don't think this really makes a good tabletop, in my opinion. If you're rushing to get through an intricate scenario with about 10 injects, it really takes away from those conversations and connection that are really that clear benefit of having the tabletop in the first place. And it really muddies those beautiful aims and objectives you've written. As I said, if you're rushing along, you're not going to get those benefits, in my opinion. Additionally, whether fortunately or not, that's up for debate, real life isn't like James Bond, in my opinion. So keep it simple, in other words. So we try to keep it to around 5 injects for around a 90-minute to 2-hour exercise. As Shelly said before, that time frame really allows people to stay engaged, in our opinion. Don't drag it out too much. People are still fresh, people are still sharp, and also anyone who has ever tried to schedule a 3-hour block in about 15 people's calendars will realise that it's impossible to do that unless you have I'd say about 9 months notice beforehand. So with those injects, as I said, you want about 5 or 6 maybe. Each one is supported by a couple of questions that Shelly was talking about earlier. And those can be used to prompt the participants if they don't start immediately talking, or, to direct them towards your aim and objectives a bit more to achieve what you're looking to get out of here. Again, we really find this allows the exercise to breathe by having that really limited scope, to really flow those discussions quite naturally, and to really avoid cutting people off. So when you're writing your injects, don't feel like you have to cover every possibility and edge case in a single exercise. It's impossible. I think we could all understand that. Instead, look at your ideas for future exercises as opportunities. And in this one, you're only keeping the focus on the most important details for the specific scenario that you are focusing on here. Additionally, don't feel like you need to cover all of the situation from the start, say someone downloading a piece of malware to a full-scale network shutdown and restoration. Keep your injects as focused on the responsibilities and expertise of the participants as much as you possibly can. This is so you can give them the most valuable experience of rehearsing their involvement in the potential situation as you can. And once those injects have been drafted, present them to your subject matter expert for verification. And remember that the exercise needs to be realistic, and that's why we do that verification process. You don't want to find out on the day, when you're standing in front of your assembled group of people, all of your hard work completed, that actually your exercise is actually completely out of the realm of possibility.
Or got software which you don't even use. The CV looks like nothing you would ever expect.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you get to the big day, your 2 hours that you've blocked out, you bring in your participants, and without introductions, because people don't get to introduce themselves in real life incidents, present them with your aims and objectives and start to take them through the exercise. There is really no set amount of time that you should focus on each inject for. Instead, really follow that flow of conversation, and that's why you should really be fastidious about the scope that you're taking with the exercise. However, one tip we will give, and Shelly's touched on it a bit before, that can really help direct the conversation and not get stuck, is emphasise to the participants to not focus on the minutiae of the exercise at hand. Getting stuck on the minutiae is something that's very understandable to a very technical audience, or just an audience that's really knowledgeable and skilled at their jobs. They obviously have a lot of knowledge that they want to share and they want to include in the exercise and they want to incorporate it. However, as we said before, tabletops aren't about incorporating as many what-ifs as you can. They're about building relationships and providing the necessary training. If you find that things are maybe getting a bit too bogged down in the details, gently move the discussion along, and either to the next inject or to the next question on your sheet that you have carefully prepared beforehand. Explaining the important skills that are trying to be developed in the course of the exercise. All right, so that brings us to our third and final tip. A tabletop is not a test, and Shelly touched on this a bit before as well. This applies to both facilitators and participants. If you are someone who is facilitating for the first time, remember, this is not an exam for yourself as much as it is for the participants. It's all about building those relationships. Tabletops are learning opportunities to rehearse processes, to build rapport, and to instill confidence in those who participate. So when you run your exercise, emphasise that there are no right or wrong answers to the scenario that you have developed. They are just chances to build upon what is discovered on the day for the future. The exercise isn't about demonstrating who has the best technical knowledge or who is the most powerful person in the room. And the flip side applies too, again, to yourself as a facilitator. Being a facilitator isn't about perfection. It's about leading a discussion that brings these opportunities to your team and the other people that you've assembled for this exercise. At the conclusion of the exercise, have a survey prepared to gather first impressions on whether participants feel that the exercise was beneficial, realistic, logical, and whether they felt like they were involved enough. And also get any key observations about areas for potential improvement in processes and anything else they want to note of them while it's still fresh during the exercise. So what you can do is you can use this survey in a way that Shelly was talking about before, which is when you are putting together your post-exercise discussion, I recommend, within a couple of days, so it's still pretty fresh for people, you can use those points that people raised in that survey to really guide that post-exercise discussion and get the most out of your participants as possible in terms of gathering their impressions and gathering their observations on, what they did really well, what's an opportunity for improvement, and how could they achieve that. All right, so keep the focus on development as you draft your after-action report and using those impressions that were gathered from both the survey and the discussion that we were just talking about, and also your observer notes. And your after-action report's really going to loosely cover an executive summary, key observations for each inject, and any improvement opportunities. The report is a reflection exercise. It's really to summarise the strengths and development opportunities, and it's to be shared with the participants so they can take that back to their teams, break it down and implement it as they wish. It highlights areas for improvement, and really importantly, it can be used as a rationale for business cases to get funding. The findings can be taken as suggestions and implemented as they wish, or maybe they want to take a more structured approach and track their implementation of the suggestions. As we said, in keeping with it being, not a test, there are no wrong answers. After drafting the report, it'll be up to the person who requested the tabletop to share it with the participants. Even if you don't, the report is still an opportunity to update participants on the outcome of the exercise. All right, so in the interests of keeping this short and a learning experience, there are our 3 tips for successful tabletops and a bit of an insight into our process, informed by our journey of running them at UQ for about the past 18 months. From here, we'd love to hear any questions that you have, but before then, we would like to suggest some next steps, which you can see on the screen now. First of all, we would encourage anyone who is interested in running tabletops to sign up to ASD's Cybersecurity Partnership Program. Depending on your organisation's responsibilities, you may be eligible to become a ASD cybersecurity partner. Additionally, the ASD has numerous exercise-in-a-box ideas on their website, scenarios that have been prepared. These are general scenarios that aren't tailored to your organisation. They're a great starting point for anyone who is looking to get into running tabletops, but without the work of developing an exercise that is specific to their organisation. And of course, we would love to talk to you. Please contact us or ask us any questions. And yeah, let's talk tabletops, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was fantastic. Thanks so much. So I'm going to start with a compliment, not really a question, but Andrew said Ella's change management course is outstanding and he better understands how to manage communications required in transformational programs. So thanks for the kind words there. We then have a question from Amber and a follow-up, which I haven't published, but I'll throw it in anyway. How do you encourage more reluctant members of the team to participate? And the sort of side question is, who's the funniest CSOC member during tabletop?
Shelly, what are some tips for getting people to come out of their shell?
I think we've done it slowly. So we might have a few members who are a little less confident, don't participate as much. So first one, engaging the waters. Next time you might go, well, what's something they know really well? Maybe they might be on call. Maybe it'll be their shift. We'll work also with their manager to say, do you think this would be a comfortable place for us to have an inject specifically to question them on it and ask them for their participation and how they would approach it?
Yeah, and even like on a small level before you get to that point, maybe consulting with their manager in terms of, maybe a specific question that you could use within an inject to bring them in so they get a bit of input as a bit of practice, I guess, before, getting that very pointed question. I think, yeah, it's definitely a building process. It's something to be done maybe over a couple of exercises. Yeah, definitely.
Over time. And the funniest CSOC member, Jericho.
Jericho, absolutely.
He's our CSOC mascot. He's a cat. He's actually on the org chart as the CSOC mascot. Yeah.
Awesome. That was a nice, safe answer. I was getting worried. Now, since I have the mic, I've got my own question, but there's actually a better version of it by Charlie, so I'll go with mine and then follow up with theirs. You've touched on it already, but building a scenario that doesn't feel contrived or unrealistic, you need to engage the SMEs, but then surely those are the targets for the tabletop itself. So how do you create a realistic tabletop without reducing the pool of people you actually want to engage in it to make it realistic?
That's a great
Great
question.
point.
I can start this one, then you can jump
Absolutely,
in.
yeah.
So Ella and I, the two of us, whilst we're not analysts, we are self-proclaimed geeks. We love to learn, so we want to know everything we can. So I'll come up with a high-level scenario. I will try and come up with injects, and then I'll just slyly prod at the analyst. If this were to happen, what system would you use?
Yeah.
Or what would this look like? And I might ask different ones and just try and fact-check, verify it. Yeah. Another scenario, we might go get their manager. So our manager's gone, we want to engage with the team. So I go, okay, we're going to send the manager on holidays. Manager, can you please help us verify this? Or can you just say you're going to step out of that tabletop?
Yeah, I think that's a really common tactic we use because, it's particularly valuable in a tabletop scenario to get people that aren't the managers, thinking about how they would deal with this. So definitely engaging the manager, and then, the manager maybe takes a bit more of a back seat when they do the actual exercise is really beneficial. Means, the love gets spread a bit, so to speak. And also I would say as well, something else that we've done is engaging people that are particularly relevant, if it's a technology or something else that's been part of a project, and maybe there is someone that worked on that project that, is not working on it on an ongoing process, to use them as the subject matter expert because they won't be involved in the tabletop themselves, but, they have a lot of knowledge to share nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think that covers Charlie's version of the question, which was when you verify the injects with the SME, do you engage a third party to ensure the team don't know what's going on, or do you exclude those people? So I guess it's some surreptitious behaviour, some actual exclusion.
Bit of a mixture.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we have, let me just skim through. With tabletops aimed at executives, how valuable is it to gain input from the technical teams or those actually managing the technical teams versus the sort of C-suite or the... I don't want to insult any C-suites or middle managers, but the more kind of strategic versus hands-on, how do you balance that, I guess, is the gist of Mark's question.
So in the development, I would say we definitely don't want to get bogged down in technical details for the executive one because they're not technical at all.
It's all about audience,
Yeah, we want to have the technical decision makers there. So maybe the manager of the IT infrastructure team, because it would be his team who might get the initial alert, and then he would have to go declare this as a P1 and raise it to our CIO, so that escalation pathway. But it's more so about those escalation pathways, testing those IR plans, BCP plans and so forth, rather than testing the technical details.
Definitely, because the executive tabletops that we've done so far are definitely more so an audience that is towards not so technical. So definitely the focus is more on escalation, whose responsibility it is, being
how do we
aware
handle
of
the crisis?
Yeah, exactly, rather than technical.
When do we
details.
communicate? When do we alert the VC that something has happened and so forth? So they can test at their level. How's their crisis management team going to function? What does that look like? And a large part of that, for us at least, it might not be for a lot of organisations, but at our maturity, it's building that awareness within our executives that we should be worried, and hopefully gaining some more funding for cybersecurity because they're like, we don't know. But also building that confidence as well, and that assurance that we've got a cybersecurity team and they are running these and they are going to handle at least the cybersecurity aspect. We can feel confident in them.
And also, particularly in terms of, I think it's important both in technical and executive is putting the names to faces, so to speak, or faces to names. Having that a discussion opportunity for discussion rather, because it's something that's really not afforded in day-to-day working. So I think that's really valuable both in terms of executive and technical.
You mentioned, how difficult it can be to schedule time in an organisation that is actually supporting the process. Trinity, perhaps with her own agenda in mind here, has asked for any tips on getting the exercise off the ground in a resistant organisation that may not see the value.
Oh, that's a really good question.
That's a hard one.
So luckily we worked at really not a resistant organisation.
Yeah,
What do
we've
you
got our
think?
director here who
Yeah.
really championed this. So we had senior level who were advocating and doing that change management aspect in terms of getting that buy-in and getting executives on board to see that. And that was really invaluable in paving the path for us to be able to deliver.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
we're lucky that we had the appetite.
Yeah, and again, I think maybe it would be a bit of a building process in terms of, demonstrating the need for cybersecurity first and then building up to something like this. Or maybe, you could go the other way or something, and it would be you start off with a team that is individually really committed to doing something like this and building from there.
I would probably go with the lower teams, the technical teams, who are probably like, what happens if we're breached? Like, why do management not? And they're the ones who want to test this, they want to work together. So even if you're so small that you don't even have a big cyber team, you might have the service desk and infrastructure and do something at that level, kind of your own.
Seek out like champions and passion, on the smaller scale first. Yeah,
And you can test your own plans and go from there.
Absolutely.
That's probably how I would go.
Yeah.
And although you've said, obviously, you're in a supportive environment, we've got a good kind of follow-up question from Jack, which is, how do you deal with difficult stakeholders if you do run into them? We already have incidents. We're doing tabletops. This isn't realistic. Do you confront that, and how do you try and turn the ship by the nose there?
Difficult stakeholders, we've had a few.
Yes. In terms of what do you think was the thing that brought them around?
I think we usually have their managers, in terms of when they're participants, we've usually got the manager support. We'll engage with the manager and we will start with those friendly teams who we know they're cybersecurity champions, and we've had people reach out and go, we want to do a tabletop.
Yeah, because I feel like that really does seed in terms of, then people hear about that it was really successful and beneficial, and maybe that would bring some people around that were previously, not a bit more resistant towards it.
And we've been very blessed. We've had great participants who've spoken very highly of it. I had someone come up to me, and he came up to me, he goes on a Monday, he goes, that was a great tabletop, Shelly, great way to start Monday morning. And whoever's saying that is lovely, but it helps get other people going, oh, it's not scary, that's something which could be beneficial.
Absolutely, yeah. Word of mouth, very beneficial, I would say, yeah.
And you mentioned avoiding fatigue in the tabletop exercises, but is that a useful scenario in itself?
Yeah, you do need to take that into account, and that can be some of your questions to ask is, all right, have we thought, is anybody going to sleep? Who's going to be the backup?
That's a really valuable thing to put as part of your questions, and think of when your injects are occurring. You're having something occur at 9 a.m. on a Sunday. Is maybe your next point coming at 11 p.m. the next day or something, and how are those developments coming and how are you handling them as they happen? What's happening if something happens at midnight? If something, is now going on for 24 hours or so, how are you managing the increased workload? What are your plans for having people cycle on and off? Yeah. I think that's really important things to press with people and think about, again, how you arrange, as you could see on our run sheet before, we talk about when something happens. Bake that into the scenario, so to speak.
Cool. I've got a sort of clutch of operational ones on the actual practicality, which I'll throw together. So as asked, do you give participants pre-reading or bring them in blind? We then have a follow-up. Who would you suggest is best to run the tabletop, and how do you make it fun? And the sort of counterpoint to that, what is the biggest challenge?
So our pre-reading that we send to people is really just the participant handbook.
Yeah, so that's what's a tabletop, what's our aim and objective, any terms they might need to be familiar with, and where is it, who's participating, that's it. Yeah,
because I feel like it's particularly valuable because, as we were saying before, people don't get to do introductions in a real incident. People don't get a whole glossary of what to expect in the incident, unfortunately. They don't know what's lying ahead. So we try to make it as realistic as possible.
Absolutely. They won't know each other's faces and we don't do introductions. They'll work it out during the scenario.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that leans nicely into Jamie's question, actually. Have you noticed sort of patterns of differences in responses and reactions to exercises between the execs and the technical teams?
I think it's always, especially with the technical, the patterns are that wasn't as scary as we thought. I mean, a great
Definitely.
pattern is quite a few people have said, this gives me confidence in my team. At first I wasn't sure, but I feel confident that they will know how to handle an incident by seeing this practiced.
Yeah, or people just being not really sure, of what to expect, or maybe, whether it was a useful use of their time. But
Yeah, so moving forward, they're a bit more engaged.
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of the executives, it's kind of building that confidence in us as a wider cybersecurity division that we are prioritising securing the university and we're proactive about that. So that's been a good amount of feedback we've received from
Yeah, and
that.
building the relationships between like cyber and other parts of the university as well,
Yeah.
whether that's research or something else, yeah.
Still have questions rolling in, which is awesome. We nudge towards lunch. It's nice that everyone's staying engaged and enthusiastic. So Jake asked, when you're planning a timeline, I guess this is more maybe down to the author, but when planning a timeline for the attack, do you start at the beginning of the attack or the end? So is it the phishing email or the exfil and ransomware? How do you build your stories and your key protagonists in these?
It really depends on the exercise and the aim and objectives. Like, as I said before, don't feel like you have to cover off all the potentials and cover off literally from, someone opening an email to a full-scale shutdown, not only because, that will take too long, but also that will maybe involve heaps of participants that you're just simply not able to accommodate in your limited seating, in your limited time, and your limited calendar. So yeah, I would say I think we touched on this a tiny bit, was, think about the people that you want to involve, think about the points that you can touch on that will really emphasise that. It might mean that the flow of the exercise is not entirely true to, it might not cover like every point that something might go through.
You might skip a few.
Yeah, like, you might put in information that's come off from another team that's not present, but, you're keeping it to what's going to keep the people in the room engaged and give them the best benefits, yeah.
And where you start can really vary. Like, we might have one start. You need to think about who's participating, so it needs to be something they would deal with. So you might start with an alert in a system which they use, and we might create an alert that we know they're not even going to touch. So this alert happens, what happens? They don't deal with it. I mean, it's Friday at 7 p.m, no one's monitoring this because that's a low priority alert. Yes. Or it might be the other end, where it's this information has been found on the dark web and the media is calling you, and then you're working backwards. But the first instance needs to be something one of the participants would either decide to deal or not deal with.
Yeah.
It can't be unrelated to the realm of what their role is.
Yeah, absolutely, because, the people that are participating in the room, let's say, if someone in another department has opened a phishing email or downloaded some ransomware or something, the people in the room mightn't even be aware of that. So, there isn't really much purpose in making that an inject because, they won't really have much to speak to about that at that point, yeah.
And I will say, generally with our executive ones, they do start in something technical, which our IT team then escalates up our crisis management levels.
Yeah, because that's really, what we're trying to do with the executive ones is look at
that escalation
test
pathway.
the pathways, yeah.
And there was a question we missed answering before, but
Yes.
who is best to run these? For the technical ones, we just run them ourselves.
Yeah, we just run, and anyone who is enthusiastic, I would say, and if you are thinking about running it, I would definitely encourage you to give it a go. It's a really good exercise to do. So yeah, technical ones, anyone who's enthusiastic, you should definitely give it a go. Yeah.
And I guess as we hit time and reach the end of our tabletop exercise in the scenario of running a tabletop exercise, how do you collate the results and sort of the lessons learned after the tabletop?
Yep. So those observer templates, having that planning team doing that catch-up straight afterwards.
Having all the participants meet a couple of days after.
To get their feedback, and then taking the observer templates, we'll then go, we'll compile that into a report template we have.
Yeah, and as we said before, you can just leave them as maybe like a list or something in that report, or the people that you're working with might like a more structured approach of a table that tracks it. Yeah, it's really up to the situation, yeah.
Awesome. If you could all join me in thanking Shelly and Ella for a great talk.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.